which is you go into academia and research and you publish and et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of like the standard of what you are supposed to do as an academic. Um, and I think ultimately uh, there's a lot more routes that people can explore. And quite frankly, the educational system is recognizing that. And programs like San Jose State, for instance, are explicitly not people to enter academia because those jobs are starting to disappear. It's becoming much more difficult to get full-time contract jobs in research-based institutes. So programs like San Jose State are more applied anthropology programs. They're a better job at placing their students in full-time jobs with master's degrees than like programs like what I went through, UCLA. Um, so that's something to be aware of for you guys that are thinking about it. And that's not just true for anthropology, it's true for many of the kind of academic fields in the social sciences. So all that said, let me kind of give you my experience, and I will say that my experience is more of a kind of traditional trajectory, so to speak. Um, and you guys that have had me in physical class have probably heard this story, but I decided that I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was in like sixth grade, and I was lucky enough that I had parents who did not just find that kind of like endearing and entertaining, but then shifted aside and said, "Why the hell do you want to do that?" Or you're going to starve to death. And my parents never ever in any way put any barriers in the way of what I wanted to do. They just simply encouraged my curiosity, and that itself is an immense privilege, right? That I know not everybody has. And it wasn't that I was coming from an incredibly privileged background, because I wasn't. It was just more that I had parents that themselves were educators, that themselves were, I think, not focused on as the primary goal in life to like become rich or famous or whatever. I mean, I grew up on a family farm, and my dad was a history teacher. Like, I think he was absolutely ecstatic that one of his kids wanted to do something that maybe was a little bit strange compared to everybody else that was coming through his classroom doors. Um, so I mean, in that respect, I was given the freedom to kind of be intellectually curious from a young age, and encouraged to kind of explore the different options with that. But also, I did so it's I never had any options in like middle school or high school to do any anthropology at all. I just knew that it was an interest of mine, and I certainly was exposed to a lot of history through my dad, and like family trips and stuff. We would go to a lot of living history museums and things like that, which only served to fuel my interest. Um, but I did choose the college I went to very specifically to make sure that I got real world experience in the field. So when I was looking at colleges, um, I had several criteria in mind. One of them was I didn't want to be in a really big city. I didn't want to go to a huge university where I was just going to be a number. I wanted to be able to be active on campus, to know my professors, because that was kind of I mean, that's my wheelhouse. It still is. It's one of the things that makes me enjoy the smaller class environments we have at the community colleges. But in looking at the different programs then that were available with those criteria, I also knew I wanted to do anthropology, or at least, and I was at that point. I think I was realistic enough to know that I didn't know what anthropology really was. It just seemed like something that was interesting. So I chose a college called Kenyon College, which was a liberal arts school in Ohio. So it wasn't too far away from where I grew up, but it was far enough that my parents wouldn't want me to come home every weekend, so I could kind of get away, so to speak. Um, but it had a study abroad program, Kenyon in general. They encourage every single student that goes to the college to take at least one semester off during their junior year, if not the entire year, and study abroad. And it's part of their general approach to liberal arts education. They really value kind of international experience and exposure to difference. So the anthropology program there was really small, but for the size of the college, which was only 1,500 students total, it was a robust program. and they had a study abroad program in Honduras. So I was already kind of thinking about like where am I going to place myself, where I'm going to get real world experience, just because like internships and things like that are difficult in academia. That's kind of more like if you're going into more of a business-based focus or something like that, you might be able to find companies that'll do summer internships and stuff. And usually more what you're looking at when you're going into social science academic field is at best you might find local volunteer opportunities to get involved. So I knew that I needed to choose a school that would give me the earliest possible hands-on experience if I really wanted to get my head wrapped around what it was I wanted to do. And luckily, once I arrived at Kenyon, the very first week, I met one of the archaeology instructors who happened not to be the people I went to Honduras with. He was actually a visiting instructor who was doing local work, kind of like what I do with archaeology students occasionally. Area here, he was excavating at a local bed and breakfast that had a Native American village site on its grounds. And it just so happened that the guy who owned the bed and breakfast was kind of an amateur archaeologist and was interested in it. So he reached out to the local college and asked if the instructor wanted to bring students out and do work. So I jumped at that as well. So I was almost every weekend of my undergrad experience, I was going out when the weather was decent with other students and a professor to excavate this local site. And it wasn't, it wasn't incredibly sexy, romantic stuff. We were digging holes in somebody's garden and finding little broken bits and pieces of stone. But that was enough that I realized that I liked doing it. And in some ways, that probably was a good experience because for 80 to 90% of the students that would volunteer to go out, they would never come back after the first day because they just thought it was horribly boring and dull and it wasn't what they thought. And the fact that I wanted to keep going told me that it was something that I was really interested in. And then, of course, I did go junior year to Honduras, and that was much more exciting because we were working on the Maya periphery. They were big prehistoric sites that had a lot more complex culture that we were investigating, and it also gave me my first long-term exposure to living in a different society and interacting with people that were not of the same culture as me. So I kind of had a dual-fold, almost like cultural anthropology experience, although I wasn't gathering data. But I had to think about a lot of the same kind of ethical and moral questions of how do you interact with people that are not like yourself, and do you try to imprint your way of the world upon them, or do you simply roll with what they've got, or do you find a balance between those two extremes? And archaeology is inherently endeavor. You almost always end up employing local people as the labor force, which means that you have to confront a lot of the same ethical questions and a lot of the same difficulties of communication and things like that cultural anthropologists do. And I came back from that experience as a junior in college, knowing for sure that that's what I wanted to do. And at that point, I started looking at graduate programs. And again, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that because the only option that you really have to even get to a point where you're employable in this discipline is that you kind of have to at least get to the level of having really still like at least a master's degree. There are very few employment opportunities with an AA or even with a bachelor's degree that have any like future kind of movement involved with it, right? So in those cases, I was really kind of making very specific strategic about where to place myself to give myself more options, right? So I was looking at grad programs, and I ended up at UCLA, which I'm really glad about because it brought me again to a completely different part of the country I'd never lived in. It forced me to live in a city I'd never done before. It gave me exposure to a much wider and more diverse group of not just my fellow students, but living in Los Angeles is immensely challenging and complex. And it also, the UCLA program is a 4 fields program. It didn't allow me to just say, I want to be an archaeologist and I'm only going to do archaeology 24/7. Even at the graduate level, they required everybody to have intro level competency in all 4 of the subfields, which is good because it provides you more flexibility when you finished a doctorate to think about where to go with it. because when I was hired at West Valley, I wasn't hired to teach archaeology. I was hired to teach all of the subfields. And I think one of the things that made me a competitive candidate for the job was that I could point to the fact that I had taught as a teaching assistant at UCLA physical anthropology and archaeology, and that I had a coursework in all of these different subfields. And not all programs are like that. So some doctoral programs or even master's programs are much more kind of channelized. So you elect which subfield you're going to go into, and that's what you learn. Which one there's plus and there's benefits and costs on both sides of that, right? I mean, but again, going back to kind of the analogy of like how are you most fit for the ecosystem, it does depend on what your ultimate goal is. But if your ultimate goal is to be either attractive to a wide range of potential employers, both inside and outside of academia, or if you want to teach, it's better to be flexible, right? To be able to have as many different alternatives that you can turn to and say, well, I have experience in this subfield, or I have experience in this kind of methodology. And because of that, I always encourage students when students come and talk to me about like what programs to look at to transfer into and things. I always say, first of all, if you're coming out of a community college as basically a sophomore, you do not need to, nor should you already be dead set on what subfield you're going to focus in. And so it's good enough to know that you want to be in anthropology in general. And then what you want to probably do is to look at a program that fits your interests, but also is going to not just allow you to kind of dabble in all four of the subfields, but in some ways force you to, because that ultimately makes you, I think, more well-rounded, even if you do end up focusing in one subfield in grad school. So I followed the regular kind of academic trajectory, and like I said, most of the people coming out of UCLA with PhDs stayed in kind of the road and are in academia. Although it's tough, you know. I mean, a lot of them came out of UCLA around the same time I did, but spent much longer than I did before they found a full-time tenure track job, right? Because in a lot of the academic settings, places like of the world, and the Stanfords of the world, and the UCs of the world, all of which have former friends from graduate school now teaching at, they tend not to hold on to faculty for very long. A lot of times you're kind of hired with a newly minted PhD for like 2 or 3 year long temporary stints. And that's made clear from the get-go. And in some cases, people don't get tenure. And then you're just kind of set back adrift on the job market to look for other jobs. And unfortunately, meanwhile, while you're doing that, you're kind of starting to lose, I think, some degree of attractability to teaching positions like at the community colleges, and even maybe to some non-academic employers. So, I think, again, like I said, the programs like San Jose State, specifically a master's in applied anthropology, I think San Jose State's been very smart. They've seen the writing on the wall for academia, and they've seen that full-time positions are fewer and far between. And I think they're thinking about the students in their program, and they want to make sure that the students come out with experience that will make them attractive to non-academic employers. And they've had a record. I have a former student from West Valley who got her master's there, and she's now the head archaeologist for the Central Coast office of the Bureau of Land Management. So she's working in the federal government, but as an archaeologist, and it's a great job. And she's doing really cool stuff. She's doing a heck of a lot more actual like hands-on archaeology than most academic archaeologists do, because she's doing it every day. And there's a lot of, here in the Bay Area in particular, there's a lot of corporate employers that are looking for people with cultural competency to be able to navigate their complex workforces. So I think in that respect, having like an AA in anthropology, even if you go on a major in something else, can be really, really powerful, because we live in an increasingly not so much the academic ecosystem, that the academic system is still old school. Like, it's still rooted in the like mid 20th century approach. But meanwhile, the rest of the world has moved on, and in particular, employers are now looking for something very different. And I don't know if you guys remember, but just a handful of years ago, there was a a major tech guy here in the Bay Area that was basically saying to young people, don't bother getting a college degree. Like, it's not worth it. Like, you're spending more money than what the value you get out of it. And he, ironically enough, himself went through the traditional educational system, and became a whatever multi-billionaire. But then what he was saying, he's like, but what I'm looking for now is not students like 20 somethings with a bachelor's degree. I'm looking for people that are creative thinkers that have experience in the real world. And I think that's where increasingly the occupational opportunities are going. And I would never dissuade people from getting academic degrees. I mean, I didn't get a PhD because I was looking at it as a stepping stone to a job. I wanted to stay in school because I liked learning. And I was really, really interested in staying in school as long as I could. And as soon as I left school, I was like, damn, get me back in. So I got a job teaching because like I like that ecosystem. But I know for some people they don't, but they kind of see it as a necessary evil to be able to get to whatever their goals are. And I don't necessarily know that there's any one pathway to those goals anymore. In fact, the traditional academic route may not be the best pathway anymore. That being said, I think for all of you guys, no matter what subfield you're interested in, getting as much real experience outside of the classroom as you can is really valuable. It is. And like I said, there's not tons of internships and stuff available, but there are always all kinds of different potential volunteer opportunities. I've had students, and I always encourage students to think about this. If I'm not doing active field work archaeologically, which is primarily what I do, you should never be shy about reaching out to faculty at the colleges and universities in the area. I had a student that I encouraged her to simply go and check out the Stanford program, and she contacted an archaeologist there. She ended up volunteering as a second year West Valley student at Stanford with one of the most well-known archaeologists in the world, doing work for him in his lab. So I mean, I think if you are interested in this, there are definitely people out there that are more than happy to have a warm, breathing body to do a lot of the crap work that they don't want to do. And at least on paper, that looks fantastic for you guys, right?
That's a lot of interesting information. I think an important.
Yeah. What questions you guys have?
I have a question. I think
Yeah.
you were saying how college and full-time career are not direct paths as much as it might have been in the past. What do you think could kind of address the career side of things? Because I know that when you were in high school, even in your first 4 years of college, you weren't really dive deep into the anthropology career side of things. So do you think volunteering and kind of just searching out for internships and programs is the way to address the career element?
Yeah, I certainly can. I mean, I and unfortunately, and I don't think this is ever going to change ever because of the way humanity works. Personal connections go much further than credentials on paper do. So having a volunteer experience or any type of internship relationship with whether it's with specific in a field or specific institutions that are well respected does still hold a lot of value. And I mean, I know for a fact that one of the reasons I got into UCLA was not because of my GRE skill, great scores, or my college academic record, both of which were good. A lot of it had to do with the fact that the mentor that accepted me into the program at UCLA, because that's really how graduate school admissions work. There's a gatekeeper effect where they look at GRE skills and GPA from college, and that literally is just will we pass these applications on? But then what happens is the faculty in the programs, who may or may not have capacity for any new students at that point, if they do, they'll take the applications that fall within their area of interest, in this case, Maya studies in Central America, and that person will look at them personally and say, this person seems like a good fit. And that's kind of the way a lot of that kind of graduate type admissions goes, because we're talking about a much smaller group of people. When I started UCLA, I was one of 14 people accepted into the program that year. for the whole anthropology program, right? So, and they probably, who the hell knows how many people apply, but it was definitely a lot. So they really narrow it down. And what makes a difference, and I know one of the reasons was that Richard Leventhal, the guy I worked with at UCLA, knew Pat and Ed, the people I went to Honduras with, quite well. And he knew the program, and he knew that they were putting out good students. And and I think he was like, all right, Andy went through this program with Pat and Ed. He has that connection. I know he's going to be a solid student. He gets into the green pile, you know.
Mhm.
And that I think, like, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's padding a resume at all, because it is real stuff. In fact, it's probably more important than the actual academic classes you might take. But having that is important.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Yep. Unfortunately, like I said, I mean, finding those opportunities can be challenging, particularly in the social science fields. But if you shake the bushes, they're there. I would advise you guys for sure to take a look at the very least, check out the American Anthropological Association website, the AAA. They have a whole section for students, and part of it is they go through all the potential careers that majors in anthropology end up in, and they also have all kinds of pointers about like what to do, activities to get involved in, and they even have networking opportunities. So for you guys that are kind of at that front end of the process, that can be a really useful resource. And if you're interested in any of the specific subfields, the AAA has subgroups. Archaeology has its own organization called the Society for American Archaeology, the SAAs, which is not associated with the AAA, but they kind of, you know, piggyback on each other. So I would check that stuff out, because all of those sources of information are really important, and they're up to date, right? They're really realistic portrayals of like, this is the status of the field right now. This is where people are getting jobs. This is the skill set that employers are looking for.
And you said Anthropology Association and what again?
Yeah, it's the American Anthropological Association, Johnny.
Mhm.
I think it's just AAA, like AAA.org. But if you put American Anthropological Association into Google.
Okay.
I was actually kind of wondering, Professor,
Yeah.
when you were looking at your graduate options and you were kind of looking at what made you decide out of kind of all the schools to pick a UCLA versus either a different UC or a different college, or even maybe stick with your undergraduate school progressing
Yeah.
to graduate school?
No, that's a good question. So Kenyon is just it's a 4-year school. So liberal arts. That was, once I got my bachelor's degree, that was as far as I could go there. Um, I because graduate school is such a hyper specific relationship between like a mentor and you as basically their mentee. Uh, it's a completely different process than looking at schools for like transfer from West Valley in as an undergrad, or if you were like applying to become a freshman at a college somewhere. Obviously, in those cases, students tend to look at the reputation of the institution first, and that tends to be the primary thing you look at. For graduate programs, the reputation of the overall institution is important, certainly, but it's the people. And so like for me, like having worked in Central America and knowing that I wanted to continue focusing on the ancient Maya, and then having specific research questions about the ancient Maya that I wanted to try to answer, that was what drove me to shop around for schools. Like it was like, okay, I need to find somewhere where there is a mentor that I can work with who currently has active research going on in Central America that will allow me a niche to pursue a certain question. And it's got to be a question that they themselves are not necessarily already that exploring, but that they need someone to look at. So I mean, it's very complex. It's not even just looking at the institution or the individual faculty. It's also thinking about what graduate students are already there and what are they studying. That's not real easy to figure out. But if you start looking at programs like if you go to the UC Santa Cruz website, they'll have a website for the anthropology program. They will have faculty profiles, and they oftentimes will have graduate student profiles too. And I always tell students when they I get a lot of students from West Valley that reach out to me after they've gotten their bachelor's degree or as they're wrapping it up, and they have questions about grad school. And I always tell them, reach out to the program, or reach out, like email the individual like professor and just say, hey, are you currently accepting students? Do you have active research going on right now? I'm considering applying to your program. These are what my interests are. And I think to some degree, you should gauge the likelihood of being accepted in that program based on the response you get, right? If you get no response at all, that might not be a good program to apply to, because that suggests that the instructor might be too busy to really even give their own graduate students a whole lot of attention. Now, again, that's not necessarily make or break, but it's something to take into consideration. So I applied to Harvard, I applied to University of Pennsylvania, I applied to UCLA, and I applied to University of Indiana, Bloomington. And the reason I applied to those 4 schools was because there were specific people at each of those schools that were of specific interest to me. They were well-known people in the field that were doing work that I felt jived pretty well with what I wanted to do. I got into all of those except Harvard, and I was put on the wait list at UPenn. UCLA accepted me outright with the best financial package. And one of the criteria for me was I will not pay for graduate school. I already had enough undergrad debt. I was like, I'm going to go to a program that will allow me to pursue a doctorate without me needing to go into further debt. Now, and the way that worked, it was that at UCLA, they waived the first year tuition for every student that they accepted. So all 14 of us had our first year free. And then after that, some of the students were given multiple years of debt-free without any obligation. For most of us, the second year you start teaching as a teaching assistant. So basically, you got lecture halls with 600 students at UCLA learning about physical anthropology, and the instructor's down front with a microphone, and the students see them for like an hour and a half each week. And then every student has like a breakout session twice a week with a graduate student that really is there to answer questions and do more of the hands-on teaching. So the grad students get paid for that. And so they waive tuition, plus you usually get a stipend. And that's basically how I made my way through grad school. So, I had several different criteria about like, what will I need in order for me to say yes to this program? And I'm glad I ended up where I went. I know some people that went through Penn around that same time, and I'm kind of glad I did not end up going there. And I think that it's, I as I said earlier, I made an atypical decision that when I was done with the PhD, I wasn't going to continue within the research only pipeline. I found that I really loved teaching, and as I got towards the end of graduate school, I began to really question the ultimate value to the world in general of like me answering this one tiny nitpicky little research question that I think probably me and 2 or 3 other people in the world cared about, right? Because research can be, academic research can be extremely like self-serving sometimes, right? And I think from my vantage point, we always need to think about like, what is the greater purpose to the world of what we're doing? We do need people doing academic anthropology. We need people that are trying to understand how the world is changing and better ways to deal with diversity. But I saw for myself that the more important mission that I thought I could better serve is trying to expose as many people as possible to the basic ideas of anthropology, which is, as you guys all know from taking classes with me, a more open-minded approach to diversity. And so that's why I chose to go not just into the teaching route, but teaching at the community colleges, because I felt like I could make the greatest impact in that setting. Whereas, if I had stayed in a university, or even if I had taught at somewhere like Kenyon, where I went as an undergrad, by and large, I would be primarily dealing with students that were anthropology majors, which would be great, but you're already kind of preaching to the converted, so to speak. So I want to make sure that I'm especially the cultural class, I think is valuable for every person that walks through that door, no matter where they're headed in terms of their future academic or occupational interests. I wish it was a required course for everybody to agree at college. Our society, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to value that type of competency yet. I think we might be getting there.
Mhm.
So that's why that's why once I got into the graduate program, I luckily had a mentor who was, I think, very, very comfortable with that, because I talked to him about it in the last couple of years of my grad program. I was like, hey, Richard, look, like, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to get the PhD, but I don't necessarily know that I'm going to like go into academia and do this. And he's like, that's cool. He's like, that we don't need every single student going into just the research kind of direction. I think he also, similar to what I just said about San Jose State, he was looking at a world where a lot of his students were coming out of graduate school and not getting jobs. And so when I told him, I was like, I think I want to do something where I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to get a job doing this relatively quickly. I think he was like right on, like, be pragmatic, but also make sure you're doing something that you enjoy and that you feel good about. And that's good advice, I think. I mean, ultimately, like, yeah, be pragmatic, do what you have to do, but also make sure that whatever you're doing is as close to what makes you happy and what you feel good about. And interesting enough, in retrospect, talking to a lot of people that I was at UCLA with, and other people too, I mean, they're all just like, man, Andy, you made the right choice. Because 20 years on, they're all, I think, realizing that even the ones that did get tenure track positions, like I have a buddy that teaches over at UC Santa Cruz, and I think he realizes that the work never ends for him. Like, once he publishes a book, then his bosses are like, okay, when's the next one coming out? And for me, like, my bosses are kind of like, have a nice summer vacation. I'm like, right on, like, I'll see you in 4 months, right? Like, and that I think is, I appreciate that, because it allows me to kind of enjoy my work immensely, but also take the time I need to be able to continue enjoying. I think you guys froze on me, right? Froze on you. So,
Yeah, you're back now.
Khalil, did that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely, and it actually kind of raises a couple more of that, but definitely on the cultural anthropology that you were talking about, I do definitely agree with that, especially because I remember I visited a friend down in San Luis Obispo, and he had a buddy that was studying anthropology, which I hadn't heard of at the time, and so this was last year, before your class, and he was talking to me about it. I'm like, wow, that sounds really cool. It sounds like a class that people should take in social sciences, especially because I was looking at political science.
Right.
And so I read your course description for cultural anthropology, and I'm like, well, this is talking about like economics and religion and like society and how it holistically fits together, which I think, yeah, it should be a subject that every major kind of needs, especially going into this day and age of what careers are becoming and kind of what they're looking for. So I definitely do agree with that point.
Right on. Yeah. Emily, did you have any questions at all?
No, at the moment, like I was having a hard time because I was researching because I'm interested in the biological and archaeology subfield
Okay.
of anthropology.
Yep.
And I was really having a hard time like going on what colleges I would want to think of transferring to when I do finish my 2 years here, and along with like what career I would want to go with, because I do want to be an archaeologist. I am really interested in also in pre-Columbian culture, just like you.
Okay.
And yeah, your thing really helped answer a lot of
Good.
questions.
And Emily, when you get to that point, and goes for all three of you guys. I mean, I'm always more than happy to sit down and have conversations about like and it is important. Like, if you already know, like, this is the general subfield I'm really interested in, or this is the general area or region, it's actually pretty easy to do that basic research into programs in the area, as well as I mean, globally, quite frankly, now internet, and kind of make strategic choices of programs might be the best possible fit for what your interests are. And I'm more than happy to talk about the local programs that I'm familiar with and employment opportunities. I think, unfortunately, for like cultural anthropology, and linguistic anthropology, there are actually far fewer non-academic employment opportunities. Although cultural anthropology is starting to open up a little bit with like, working in some of the big kind of corporation settings and stuff. But for archaeology and biological anthropology, there's actually a fairly large number of non-academic employment opportunities, in addition, obviously, to the academic opportunities, whether it's at museums or whether it's with public settings, state government or federal government. So there's a lot to kind of look at. And Emily, you in particular might then want to take a look at the Society for American Archaeology website, just because that does have a fair amount of information specifically about archaeology. And also, Emily, there's a website called Shovelbums. I think it's shovelbums.org. And the American Institute of, I think it's the Archaeological Institute of America. Those are basically clearinghouses for field school opportunities, job opportunities, and then also volunteer and internship opportunities within usually archaeology specifically, but sometimes they do have general anthropology stuff. So those are all places to kind of look for ideas, even if you're not currently like looking for like employment or a volunteer opportunity. Those are good places to get an idea of where like the whole ecosystem, like what's actually out there and available.
What was it called again? Shuffle Bun?
It's called Shovelbum. Here, I'll put it in the chat, just because that might be easier. So I think it's shovelbums.org. And then the other one is the AIA, and I think it's the Archaeological Institute of America. But again, those are, if you put them into a search engine, you should be able to find them online pretty easily.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
This is like an also random question. Would you happen to know someone by the name of Stephen? I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Durfler?
Say the last name again.
Let me type it out because I don't. Is in the chat.
Stephen Durfler. That's not a familiar name to me.
Oh, okay. Because he was a professor at my other college. I used to go to an art school until I realized I wanted to pursue something differently. And he was, he didn't really, well, then again, he studied more of like Central America. He was mostly focused on the Middle East.
Okay.
Of the world, so.
Interesting. Yeah. Where was that, Emily?
The college, it was Ringling
Yeah.
College of Art and Design. It was an art college.
Okay. All right. Yeah. No, I'm not familiar with him. I'll have to check him out.
I think to kind of like touch on all of those like really interesting like perspectives and ideas you brought, it was about like how education and careers are complicated, and to kind of like keep that in mind. You talked about how as you were growing up, there wasn't a plethora of anthropology careers right there for you. You talked about how like even in your first 4 years of your liberal arts college, you were kind of just like shoveling and doing some anthropology related work and archaeology related work, but it wasn't concrete and like, because some people may see you as like a full-fledged anthropology professor who was like born in it, raised in it, and was just surrounded by it everywhere. But it is kind of what you make out of it, and you were always kind of looking for what you wanted out of it, which was your studies in Latin America and your certain like your particular concerns. You talked about how like in graduate school there was more particular things you were looking for, like a mentor that was related to the things you wanted to study, and then you shifted to trying to take what you were learning away from research, from that particular question, from that very like specific question, to more of a supportive element into the community, how you can support the community and get involved into that. So I think that was interesting.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good summary.
Mhm. I think I want to just ask everybody who was here today, do you guys have any like thoughts you guys want to take away from this? What was like something that was like, hey, that's a very interesting thing? Because that's what I thought throughout this meeting. If anybody wants to share that, Khalil or Emily.
Yeah, I definitely thought your process in kind of choosing your graduate school, and also definitely with kind of how you were talking about it's shifting away from being such a linear pathway in academia now that it used to be, and it's kind of shifting more towards kind of like these internship opportunities, or even like going and working in the field, or possibly not even going to traditional like getting your bachelor's or AA or even master's PhD. It's kind of shifting away from that. I thought that was a very interesting point that you brought up, Professor.
Yep, cool. One thing I also will say very quickly, if I can hop in here, is that and this was something that Khalil you had asked about, and then I forgot to mention it, but I I know that at least when I was at UCLA, um, I think in general anthropologists, as much as they can be kind of very like egotistical at times and like really kind of want to mold their graduate students and to become like miniature like models of themselves. I think because we study diversity, we also tend to recognize and value diverse opinions within our own field. And at least partially because of that, at UCLA, it was very, very rare for undergrads in the anthropology program to be admitted into the graduate program. And I know that sometimes the faculty really hated that tendency because in some cases they recognized that there were certain undergrads that were absolutely stellar and they were like, this, we should keep this student here. And there was in the entire time I was at UCLA, which was I think I went from bachelor's to PhD in 6 years, which was very quick, mostly because I just was like, get out of here. I enjoyed it, but at the same time, there were people that were lifers that had been there for like 15 years. I didn't want to become one of them. But that entire time, there was one undergrad that got a bachelor's degree at UCLA and was admitted for the PhD program. And I think that tends to be the case because the programs, I think, recognize that it's important not to have people that are just completely isolated and exposed to only one viewpoint for their entire academic career. And I mean, that's a risk here at West Valley, right? Like, I know that like I have students that are like, man, I love anthropology. I want to be an anthro major. And they've only ever taken classes with me. And like, that's very flattering to me. I'm like, that's great. That's awesome that I've turned you onto this field. But like, you need to take other classes with other instructors because you need to recognize that like I am presenting to you Andy's world, like, and that's not necessarily the world. Like, it's important to expose yourself to as many different points of view and approaches as possible. And because of that, if you know for sure that there's a certain grad program that you're like, that's really where I would love to go for graduate school, you might want to take in mind that if you're there as an undergrad, they might not keep you there all the way through. And I don't know that that complete consistent pattern all the way across academia anymore. But I heard a lot of stories like that from people that I interacted with at different institutions as well, that there was a tendency to not encourage undergrads to apply for the graduate program at the same institution. And again, I think it was mostly just to try to get as much experience and as many different kind of contacts as possible. So something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Coach. Emily, do you have any thing you want to highlight, something you learned from this panel?
No, what the person had said, I was really interested in your process of choosing your college and your career. I guess another thing that was interesting was the topic of education and career and how those are different, how they drastically change throughout the years.
Yeah. Totally, totally.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Oh, go ahead, Eddie.
Well, Johnny, one thing that I'll do is, and I'll send this to you. So right now, the West Valley is, and this is a statewide initiative. We're in the midst of doing what is called the Guided Pathways program, and there's two parts of it really that you guys really kind of see. One of it is that the college is finally asking every academic program on the campus to come up with a really neat, clean kind of pathway over 2 years. This is how you get an AA or an ADT in this discipline. So like the counselors all have it, and like if you walked into a counselor your first day on campus and just said, I want to major in anthropology, they can just give you a sheet and be like, take these classes. And it's not just anthro classes, it's everything. Math, stats, this is what classes to take. This is ideally which semesters to take them. That's how you get out of here in 4 semesters. So that's one thing that's really nice. The other thing though is that they're kind of putting together basically like a career page through the college website that's actually really robust. And one of the things they want is they want to be able to upload information. So for instance, if you go and say, I want to be an anthropologist, you can go to the website or talk to a counselor and they can say, okay, well, here's the job opportunities that will be accessible to you given the certain degrees. And these are the potential income levels you can expect and things like that. And so I've already put that together for anthropology. And Johnny, if shoot me an email to remind me if you don't mind. Okay. I can just send you that. It's a Word document, and I don't know what it's going to look like once they put it up in a publicly accessible way. But you feel free to share that amongst anybody that's interested, because it kind of gives you a good idea. I mean, and I had to say, like, there was just one part there, like, what employment opportunities are there for students with an AA? I was like, for anthropology, there aren't any. Like, you're not going to like that. You're not qualified for any specific job with an anthropology AA. There might be employers that will find it interesting and employ you, but it's not going to set you up for a very clear pathway directly into a job. With a bachelor's degree, it's also limited, but there are some specific kind of like employers that sometimes are interested in people that have bachelor's degrees in anthropology. And then once you get to the master's degree and up, they become much, much more specific. So it's kind of in general, kind of general-ish, but it gives you an idea of what might exist out there outside of just the traditional academic, like occupational kind of end goal, so to speak.
Could you say like one other type of anthropology job besides a teacher that you found in your career page?
Yeah, well, so a lot of people that are getting degrees in cultural anthropology are finding themselves really, really sought after by like NGOs, like non-governmental organizations that work either as aid agencies or work as consultants with either international bodies or foreign governments. There's a fairly large and growing appetite cross-culturally for like heritage management, and archaeologists and cultural anthropologists oftentimes are really attractive in that because you have the competency that will help. Like if a government's trying to like put together a museum for the first time, or if they're trying to reach out to remote people's their national boundaries and try to extend aid or whatever, those are jobs that I rarely think of as like, this is what I want to end up doing with an anthropology degree. But they're the jobs that most need people that have this type of competency. You finally are starting to see the people that are heading up those types of agencies being aware of that. So like Peace Corps is hiring, Peace Corps largely works with volunteers, but the kind of the upper level staff and kind of administration of Peace Corps is slowly filling up with anthropologists. World Bank, International Monetary Fund, stuff like that. Now, those are high profile jobs, but they employ a lot of people, and they're increasingly looking for people that have degrees within social sciences at the very least, international relations, political science is a big one now, economics, but with that kind of added bonus of like cross-cultural competency is really, really attractive. So I think now the employment field now in 2020 is radically different than it was when I graduated with a bachelor's degree in 1996, right?
Mhm.
So 25 years later, there are far more employment opportunities for anthropologists than there were then, but they're different, right? It's not that there are more jobs in academia. There's far less, actually. Instead, it's that there are all these other opportunities that have always been there. They weren't hiring anthropologists. They always should have been.
Mhm.
Now they're starting to realize, mostly because a lot of disastrous mistakes that were made, that they need people that are thinking from a systems point of view, right? And that idea of like systems analysis and systems thinking is becoming very important and very popular. And anthropology, that's specifically what I do, right? Like Khalil pointed out, that like anthropology really isn't about any one thing. It's about pointing out the connections between everything. It's about saying economics can't be separated from politics, from religion, or from social structure. And if we don't realize how those things are interwoven, we're going to make terrible blunders if we try to change anything at all about that system. And that's true when we're facing inwards, thinking about our own system. And it's even more important when we're looking at other systems that we're not that terribly familiar with inherently. We have this incredible ability to mess things up, and we have done a good job of messing things up over the last several decades. So I think that there's a really exciting body of employment opportunities out there. It's just that I think that there's anthropology and those jobs are slowly starting to find each other, but it's happening slowly, because by and large, a lot of students that are going through most traditional graduate programs are still being told by the professors, write a book, do research, stay in academia. And that's because like the crusty old, like 70-year-old professors that are there, that was the ecosystem that they were part of. And that's where they got their jobs. That's all they know, right?
Yeah.
What was it? I think 2 or 3 years ago, the American Anthropological Association meetings, their theme for the entire like professional meeting was, it was something like resilience and persistence.
Mhm.
And that had a twofold meaning. Part of it was resilience and persistence of cultures. So it was really talking about trying to recognize the importance of preserving rapidly disappearing cultural groups around the world. But it was also about anthropology itself. I mean, I think the field, for various reasons, not the least of which is diminishing public funds to fund our research, the field is really looking at the future and saying, is anthropology going to exist into the future? And I think the answer is not the way it has. Like we need to rethink ourselves. We need to reimagine anthropology as a discipline, and we can't think of it as simply as an academic discipline anymore. We have to think of it as an active force in the world, where we are doing things that in the past most anthropologists would not have seen as legitimate, first of all, because it becomes more active. It steps out of the passive role of just simply sit back and study, and it's more about jumping in and making some sort of change. But also, it's simply, I think I think it's a good direction, because it means that we're using what we know about humans in a really, really positive, like active way, instead of it just being dusty knowledge that we put on a shelf somewhere. And you know, most social sciences are kind of having that same reckoning, quite frankly, is realizing that there's the applied aspect, and then there's the academic aspect. And a lot of people in academia kind of look down their noses at the applied part, but that's really short-sighted, because if they continue to have that kind of hands-off approach, the disciplines are going to die, because the public doesn't care about them, because they don't see how they're relevant to their daily lives. Again, that's why I said I think San Jose State's applied program was really forward thinking, because I think they realized we're doing our students a disservice if we encourage them to stay only in academia and not try to like find jobs in the real world. So I think that's where the jobs are increasingly.
There's that evolution where
Yeah.
we are changing like what we see, and like improving it to see how we can make it better.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. And we have to adapt ourselves, right? The field has to evolve and adapt to the changing world that we're part of.
And I think when you're learning about anthropology, you are less likely to just like stay in academia when you know there are like so many things you can do, or just like stay away from like things that you feel can be different. Because when you learn about all of these like different complexities, you start to navigate it in a way that balances everything and find the best solution.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And like I said, I mean, hopefully one of the benefits from just even taking an intro class is that, you know, you walk out of there and say, okay, you know, I still want to major in political science, but I'm looking at political science from a slightly different vantage point now, because I realize how all these other factors are affected by it and affect it in turn. And that I think is of benefit.
Yeah, definitely. And especially I remember, like, I think it was like 2 weeks after taking your class, I walked out of your classroom after that day and I was like, you know, I might want to switch my major, because I was like, this is really interesting stuff. And then from what you were talking about, where it's like, well, I've only had this one teacher for this specific, so that's kind of what deterred me from doing that specifically, but at least with political science, and I think this is becoming more true for most majors at least, it's kind of, you want to take into effect, and again with anthropology, kind of the whole view of society and how you can put that with your major and how you can make that work for you in a professional setting later.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, I think to some degree that might be a little bit of a benefit of the being at the community colleges, because by and large, the community colleges are only able to offer a relatively restricted number of courses in any one discipline. So in order for you guys to get your 60 transferable units, you kind of have to cast around and cobble together 60 units out of a lot of different stuff. And that's in some ways that's good, because it forces you to kind of dabble in fringes that you may not have really ever thought about before or engaged with. And you know, from my vantage point, things that I am a little bit concerned about with the shifts that I see in higher ed is that there seems to be a shift away from that type of general liberal arts education in a lot of public academic settings. And instead it's like, let's create this like pipeline where like somebody says, I want to be an econ major or a poli-sci major. Let's just put them in that. And like, they don't have to waste time messing around with anything else. They just take those classes and boom, they get a job. And I think that can be good. And it's certainly beneficial to students who need to get through school quickly and need to get a job quickly to be able to support themselves and or their family and stuff. I understand all of that, but at the same time, we're losing something when we kind of speed up path up too quickly and then put blinders on students so they're not distracted by anything else. I mean, I stumbled into so many fascinating other fields as an undergrad, and I had all those moments where I walked out of the class and be like, maybe I want to be a film major. Maybe I want to be an English major. Maybe I want to. And I think what kept bringing me back to anthropology in my case was that I saw how all that stuff related back to that discipline. And I was like, I think that this is where I get to bring everything I'm interested in together a little bit. But I think being able to have that time to breathe and spread out and explore a little bit is really, really important. And I think it makes all of us more well-rounded citizens, quite frankly. I'm always concerned when we simply say, when you're 16, choose what you want to be. That's what you're going to be, and that's all you're going to do, and that's your role in society. And that's a much more streamlined, efficient form of education. And in some ways, it's very much more like some European systems. But you end up then with these kind of bifurcated societies where people only know silo. And I mean, our society does not need more people that are stuck in their own little society silos, right? We need more people that are able to talk to each other, regardless of whether they agree with each other, I think. And I think that because of that, having the opportunity at a 2-year institution like West Valley to kind of mix and match and kind of check out other classes is good. And I have students that come and talk to me and they're like, Andy, I took all 5 anthro courses at West Valley. There are no others offered here. What else can I take that might help me with my anthro major? And I tell them, like, take cultural geography, take a psych class, you know, take sociology, like if you want to do bioinf, take the anatomy class. It's going to be brutal, but it's going to make you a better biological, and you'll know things that grad students won't know yet. Like, so it's kind of like that idea of like setting yourself up to do well doesn't necessarily say I only do courses in this one discipline. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I actually did have a quick question. I know I don't know how long we've been going for, but I did have just one final quick question,
Yeah, go for it.
at least for me. One of my professors actually at the beginning of the semester, and I think you know him, Professor Kelly. He,
Yeah.
because I know you guys are together in a couple things, but he was actually talking about, I'm taking him for comparative government, and he was kind of talking about how with like the situation we're in now with COVID and we're on Zoom, so everything's virtual. He was talking about how the evolution for academia could be changing, and he was specifically saying that he's intrigued by it, but he's also kind of worried about what it could lead to in the future for academics. And I didn't know if you personally had any like thoughts on that and kind of the situation we're in now and where we could be headed.
Yeah, you know, we'll see. We will see. I mean, I think I'm very concerned about the fact that like I just hit the point this semester where campus shut down last semester. So I'm actually able to now use videos from last semester. And I'm doing that because it makes my life a little bit easier. I feel really, I have very mixed feelings about it because it feels like I'm taking shortcuts that are kind of lame, even though literally I'd be saying verbatim the exact same thing all over again if I redid the videos. But on your point, what that concerns me about is that like when I get to the point where I have a whole semester worth of lecture videos, why does the college need me anymore? Right. And like at what point is like the transition to more like online kind of learning management system based education? At what point does that then become like the educators just end up being basically like paid to grade? And then the students are basically being taught just this canned content from either publishers or by like some other sort of automated generation. And I think that that's scary because I think that once we get to the point where like all education is kind of canned and lockstep and consistent, then you lose exactly what we were just talking about, where it's like you don't want to just know Andy's version of the world. Like you need to learn a lot of different versions of anthropology or a lot of different. And if we get to a point where we say this is the one version of the world that all students that are taking this class get every semester for the rest of time, that loss of diversity of viewpoint and dialogue, I think is not, it's not good. It's not good. So I think that, I mean, I myself am not teaching things exactly the same way I taught 5 years ago. Because my thinking about the what is relevant and what's not, and what's important, and what's not, and how things are connected, it changes, right? Every semester I teach, I think about what I'm teaching differently than I have in the past. And as things happen, like coronavirus or the Black Lives Matter movement or whatever, there are themes that need to be. And I think that the idea of kind of more systematized, standardized delivery of content, as is being shown, we can easily do with COVID, right? I mean, I guess, and probably what Tim was talking about, Dr. Kelly was talking about, was like, once the administrators realize that they can just have us all doing this 24/7, like I'm a little bit disturbed about what that knowledge will lead to, right? I mean, I hope that at some point they don't say like, well, Andy, you don't have a brick and mortar classroom anymore, so now we can just pack 500 students into one of your lectures. We're not going to pay anymore. But we're going to have you teach like 50 times more students and charge each of them the same. And like that I think raises concerns. And it's definitely a concern on the part of like the faculty union and stuff, the way that like the online ed stuff can potentially be kind of exploited by various groups. And then on the flip side, I mean, I'm always concerned about, I mean, you guys know when you were sitting in my classroom, you couldn't look at your notebooks or read your textbook or look stuff up on Google. So like doing assessments online via Canvas raises that specter of like, do I now have to completely re-engineer my assessments and everything? Like, I haven't quite gotten to the point where I've decided to do that yet, but we'll see. You know, this semester will be really the first one that's all online entirely, and it'll be interesting to see how similar or different performance levels are on the content.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think it's a concern, especially when you get like 5 years possibly down the road, and if we're still doing a virtual setting like this, even the connections that you're going to make with your professors or with other students are
They're
definitely
gone.
going to diminish. Yeah.
Yep.
And even
Absolutely.
with clubs, I think they're trying to start converting clubs to more online, like we're kind of doing. And I definitely know Club Fair. There was quite a few more clubs than I realized would be there. But that is definitely something that's also concerning.
Yeah. Yeah. The community of community college is, I mean, it's weird because it goes both ways, right? I mean, the community is now massive because it's not bounded by any sort of geographic space, but at the same time, the actual connections are gone. And like, again, I'll just give you this example. I feel like I know my students this semester better than I've ever known any students in any semester before, because like the first week, like discussion forum is like, who are you? Why are you taking this class? What are your interests? And it was fantastic because like I never get to sit down and ask every single student that enrolls in one of my classes all this. You know, I might know those answer those questions for like 3 or 4 students per class at most. Now I know those answers for everybody. And like in some ways I feel like, oh, like I know like, oh, this student is like their brother took my class 5 years ago. I would not have probably known that in face-to-face class. And now I know that. So like those connections are interesting, but then at the same time, like it's very, very static. It's that one set of information I know about the students, and then like everything else is just kind of done via video and occasional for the few brave souls that like show up to do this type of face-to-face stuff during my office hours, you know. So yeah, there's like anything, there's costs and benefits to it. We could probably do it a lot better than what we are doing it. But you know, the trade-offs are huge in terms of the time investment and stuff. And what I'm realizing is that if I wanted to teach even remotely the way I taught in face-to-face settings online, I don't know when I would sleep or eat or do anything other than sit in this chair, you know. Just hard to do. It's a lot of work. Good. All right. Anything else, Johnny?
I think that's been a great place to end it. Thank you guys for coming to our anthropology club meeting. Thank you, Andy, so much. Like this was a great discussion. And
Good. Yeah. Great conversation, everyone.
yeah, thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Khalil.
Definitely.
Take care, everybody. Let's try to get more people involved if we
Bye.
can and expand it out.
Yeah, I'll email you, Andy, and then I'm gonna post the things on the chat on our Discord. I'll also send you, Andy, our Discord link if you want to join that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. See you, Emily.
Have an awesome one, guys.
All right. See you, Khalil.
Bye.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.
All right. Bye, Johnny. See you guys.
Bye. Yeah.